Before the story begins, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel, so you don't miss more emotional and surprising stories ahead. And now let's dive into today's story. Don't make this harder than it has to be, Mom, my son said as he wheeled my suitcase into the nursing home lobby. We'll visit every Sunday. I promise. I nodded like I believed him. What else was I supposed to do? The automatic doors slid shut behind us with a soft mechanical hiss, and suddenly the world I had lived in for 72 years felt very far away. I'm glad you're here. Stay with me until the end, and tell me where you're watching from, because I never imagined my story would travel farther than the small Ohio town where I raised my son. The lobby smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old coffee. Somewhere down the hallway, a television played a game show too loudly while a nurse pushed a medication cart across the polished floor. My son Jason stood beside me in an expensive wool coat, glancing at his watch every few seconds like he already had somewhere more important to be. Vanessa, my daughter-in-law, touched my shoulder gently. Too gently. The way people touch strangers at funerals. You're going to love it here, Eleanor, she said with a smile that never reached her eyes. There are activities every day. Bingo. Gardening. Movie nights. I looked past her toward the rain streaking the windows. 3 weeks earlier, I'd still been living in my own house. The little white colonial with blue shutters that my husband and I bought in 1978. The house where Jason took his first steps in the living room while I cried so hard I nearly dropped the camera. The house where every doorway still carried tiny pencil marks showing how tall he'd grown each year. But after my second fall that winter, Jason insisted I couldn't stay alone anymore. Just until we figure things out, he told me. This is temporary. Temporary. Funny how easily people use that word when it's not their life being packed into cardboard boxes. A nurse named Carol walked over holding a clipboard. She had kind gray eyes and wore bright pink sneakers that squeaked softly against the tile. Room 214 is all ready for you, Miss Whitmore, she said warmly. Jason gave my shoulder a quick squeeze. See? Everything's set. I studied his face, searching for the little boy who used to run into my arms after baseball practice smelling like dirt and summer grass. But all I saw now was a tired middle-aged man checking emails while his mother stood beside him holding the last pieces of her life in 2 small suitcases. You'll come Sunday? I asked quietly. Jason looked up immediately, almost offended. Every Sunday, Mom. I swear. Vanessa smiled again. And Sophie misses you already. My granddaughter. That hurt the most. They had told her grandma was moving somewhere safer. Like I was relocating to a sunny retirement resort instead of a place where lonely people stared out windows waiting for visitors who rarely came. Jason kissed the top of my head quickly. Then his phone buzzed. Vanessa reached for his arm. And just like that, they were leaving. We love you, Jason called as they headed toward the doors. I smiled and waved until their car disappeared into the gray afternoon rain. Then I sat beside the window in the lobby and waited for them to come back because part of me still believed mothers are supposed to trust their sons. Dinner came and went. The nurses changed shifts. Outside, the parking lot lights flickered on one by one. By 9 o'clock, the lobby had gone quiet except for the hum of vending machines down the hall. Jason never came back that night. And by the end of the first week, I realized something even worse. He hadn't called either. By the second Sunday, I had already learned the rhythm of the nursing home. Breakfast arrived at 7 sharp on beige plastic trays. The elevators made a soft ding every few minutes. Around noon, families started showing up carrying flowers, balloons, grocery bags, and grandchildren with sticky hands. The whole building changed on Sundays. The halls became louder, brighter, full of perfume, laughter, and conversations about church services and football games. I started wearing my blue cardigan every Sunday morning because Jason once told me it made me look elegant. I would brush my silver hair carefully, add a little lipstick, and sit near the lobby window by 11 o'clock. The first Sunday, I told myself traffic must have delayed him. The second Sunday, I told myself Sophie probably had a school project or a soccer tournament. By the third Sunday, even I was running out of excuses. Across from me sat a man named Walter whose daughter visited every weekend from Indianapolis. She always brought him homemade banana bread wrapped in foil. Around 2 in the afternoon, she would wheel him outside so they could sit in the courtyard together beside the fountain. Walter complained constantly about his arthritis, the food, the nurses, the weather. But every Sunday, when his daughter walked through those doors, his entire face softened like sunlight touching old paper. I tried not to stare. One afternoon, Carol stopped beside my chair holding 2 paper cups of coffee. "You are going to wear a hole in that carpet if you keep pacing between the window and the front desk," she said gently. I laughed softly and accepted the coffee. I used to tell my son the same thing when he waited for the ice cream truck every summer. Carol sat beside me for a moment. "He will come around." I nodded, though something inside me tightened when she said it. Come around. Not come today. Not come soon. Just eventually. Like everyone already understood something I was still trying not to admit. That evening, I returned to my room and stared at my cell phone for nearly an hour before finally calling Jason. It rang 4 times before voicemail answered. His cheerful recorded voice sounded strange now. Distant. "Hey, this is Jason. Leave a message." I almost hung up when I heard it. Instead, I said quietly, "Hi, sweetheart. Just checking in. I hope you all are doing well. Tell Sophie Grandma misses her." I kept my voice light. Careful. Mothers learn how to hide pain from their children even when those children become grown men. The next morning, there was still no response. By Wednesday, I called again. Voicemail. Thursday night, I texted Vanessa asking if everything was all right. She responded 3 hours later with only 4 words. "Jason has been busy." Busy. Such a small word for something that feels enormous when you are alone. I read the message several times under the dim light beside my bed while rain tapped softly against the window. Down the hallway, someone was crying out in their sleep. Somewhere else, a nurse laughed quietly at the front desk. Life kept moving inside those walls while mine felt paused, like a clock that had stopped ticking. The following Sunday, I sat in the lobby again wearing the same blue cardigan. At noon, the parking lot filled with visiting families. By 3 o'clock, it had emptied again. I stayed until the sky turned dark and the lights reflected against the wet pavement outside. Jason never came. And for the first time in my life, I began wondering if my son felt relief every time he forgot to call me. The days began blending together after that. Morning pills. Lukewarm coffee. Afternoon television programs nobody really watched. At night, the sound of oxygen machines humming softly through half-open doors. Sometimes I would wake before sunrise and forget where I was for one beautiful second. Then I would see the pale cream walls of room 214 and remember everything all over again. One Thursday afternoon, Carol found me standing beside the community bulletin board, pretending to read flyers about chair yoga classes and movie nights. "You all right, Eleanor?" she asked quietly. I smiled automatically. Women my age learn to smile before telling the truth. Of course. But Carol did not move. She crossed her arms gently and lowered her voice. "You know, you do not always have to pretend you are fine." That sentence stayed with me long after she walked away. Because pretending had become second nature to me. I pretended Jason was busy. I pretended Vanessa meant well. I pretended every empty Sunday was temporary. That evening, I decided to call home instead of Jason's cell phone. Home. I still called it that even though I had not slept there in nearly 2 months. The phone rang 6 times before voicemail answered. But it was not our old family voicemail anymore. Jason's cheerful recording about the Whitmore residence was gone. In its place was a cold automated message saying the number had been disconnected. I stared at the phone in my lap while something slow and heavy settled into my chest. The next morning, I called the bank to ask why my monthly statements had stopped arriving at the nursing home. A young customer service representative politely informed me that all correspondence had recently been changed to paperless delivery. "Your son Jason Whitmore authorized the update last month," she explained. I felt my fingers tighten around the phone. "Authorized?" I repeated softly. "Yes, ma'am. He is listed on the account as your financial contact." Financial contact? I remembered sitting at my kitchen table weeks before moving here while Jason slid papers toward me between bites of takeout Chinese food. "This is just in case you fall again, Mom," he said casually. "It lets me help manage things while you settle in." I had signed without reading carefully because that is what mothers do when their children ask for help. We trust first. We question later. Sometimes too late. I thanked the bank representative and hung up slowly. Outside my window, snow had begun falling across the parking lot in soft, quiet sheets. For several minutes, I simply sat there listening to the heater click on and off beside my bed. Then I opened my nightstand drawer and pulled out the framed photograph I kept hidden inside. Jason at age 10 standing beside his bicycle on Christmas morning. Missing front tooth. Red mittens. The biggest smile I had ever seen. I traced the edge of the frame with my thumb and tried to understand how that little boy became a man who forgot to call his mother. Later that afternoon, Vanessa finally texted back after nearly 2 weeks of silence. Sorry, we have been overwhelmed lately. Jason is under a lot of pressure at work. Nothing about visiting. Nothing about calling. Not even a simple "how are you?" I read the message twice before setting the phone face down on my blanket. Across the hall, someone laughed loudly during bingo night. Downstairs, dinner trays rattled against metal carts. Life continued moving around me while my own family quietly erased me from theirs piece by piece. And for the first time, I stopped wondering when Jason would come back. Instead, I started asking myself a much harder question. What exactly had my son been doing while I sat here waiting for him? That night I could not sleep. The radiator beside my bed hissed softly while snow pressed against the windows in thick white silence. Across the room, my suitcase still sat half unpacked beside the dresser because some part of me had refused to fully settle in here. I kept telling myself I would not be staying long. Mothers are good at believing temporary lies when the truth feels too painful to hold. Around 2 in the morning, I walked slowly down the hallway toward the common kitchen for tea. The nursing home looked different at night. Smaller somehow. Sadder. A television flickered quietly in the corner while an old man slept upright in a recliner with a blanket folded across his lap. One nurse typed notes at the front desk beneath fluorescent lights that made everyone look tired. I filled a paper cup with hot water and stood by the window watching snow collect along the parking lot curbs. That was when I started thinking about my husband for the first time in weeks. Robert Whitmore had been gone nearly 9 years, but there were nights I could still hear his footsteps in my memory so clearly it startled me. He used to wake before dawn every morning and grind coffee beans loudly enough to wake the entire house. I used to complain about it constantly. Funny what becomes precious after someone is gone. Robert loved Jason with a kind of fierce pride I never quite understood. That boy is going to do something important someday, he would say after every little league game, every school concert, every report card taped proudly to the refrigerator. And Jason had been a good son once. At least I believed he was. When Robert died from his heart condition, Jason stayed at my house for almost 2 weeks sleeping on the living room couch because he said he did not want me alone. Every evening he made dinner while I sat numb at the kitchen table staring at sympathy cards. One night, I remember finding him quietly fixing a loose cabinet, hinge his father never got around to repairing. Dad would have hated leaving things unfinished, he said softly. I cried harder that night than I had at the funeral. Because grief tricks you into loving people more fiercely when they show kindness. Looking back now, I wonder if that was the beginning of everything changing. After Vanessa came into Jason's life, little things shifted slowly. Almost invisibly. Holiday dinners became shorter. Phone calls became less frequent. Decisions started happening without me instead of around me. Vanessa always smiled politely. Always called me Eleanor instead of Mom. Always acted helpful while quietly creating distance one careful inch at a time. She operated through silence more than words. Through exclusion instead of confrontation. There was never one dramatic moment I could point to and say there. That was when I lost my son. It happened gradually. Like watching sunlight disappear during winter afternoons. By the time you notice it is dark, the warmth is already gone. Back in my room, I sat on the edge of the bed holding the old photograph of Jason on Christmas morning. 10 years old. Missing front tooth. Arms wrapped around a bicycle we could barely afford that year. Robert had worked overtime for almost 3 months to buy it. I remembered how Jason hugged us both afterward and said, "When I grow up, I am going to take care of you forever." I closed my eyes for a long moment. Then I carefully placed the photograph back into the drawer. Because for the first time, I allowed myself to consider something I had avoided for months. Maybe my son had not abandoned me suddenly. Maybe he had simply become the kind of man I refused to see until now. The next Monday morning, Carol knocked softly on my door just after breakfast. "You have a visitor," she said with a small smile. For one foolish second, my heart lifted so fast it almost hurt. I set down my coffee immediately and smoothed my cardigan with trembling hands. Jason? I asked. Carol hesitated just long enough for me to understand the answer before she spoke. No, honey. A gentleman named Richard Hale. The name sounded familiar, but it took me a moment to place it. Richard had been Robert's attorney years ago. He handled the paperwork when we bought our first rental property back in the 1980s. I had not seen him in nearly a decade. When I entered the small visitor lounge downstairs, Richard stood slowly from his chair the moment he saw me. He looked older now, thinner. His dark hair had faded almost completely gray, but his eyes were still sharp and kind behind wire-rimmed glasses. Eleanor, he said warmly, it has been too long. We sat beside the window while weak winter sunlight stretched across the carpet. Richard held a leather folder in his lap but did not open it right away. Instead, he studied me quietly for a moment. I tried calling your house several times, he said carefully. Jason told me you were resting and did not want to be disturbed. A strange chill passed through me. Why were you calling? Richard exhaled slowly and finally opened the folder. Because your son recently requested copies of several property documents connected to your estate. Estate. I hated that word suddenly. It sounded less like a life, and more like leftovers people sorted through after someone disappeared. Richard slid several papers across the table. I recognized my address immediately. Maplewood Lane. My house. My fingers tightened around the edges of the documents as I noticed highlighted sections and handwritten notes in Jason's neat block lettering. The property was listed for sale 3 weeks ago, Richard said gently. For a second, I honestly thought I had misunderstood him. Listed? I whispered. Richard nodded once. There was a power of attorney attached to the paperwork you signed before moving here. Jason legally had the authority to begin the process. I stared at the page until the words blurred together. Somewhere nearby, an old clock ticked steadily against the wall. A nurse laughed softly in the hallway outside. Ordinary sounds. Normal sounds. The kind that continue even when your entire world quietly cracks apart beneath your feet. He said this place was temporary, I murmured finally. Richard's expression changed slightly then. Sadness mixed with something closer to anger. Eleanor, he said carefully. The staging company already removed most of the furniture from the house. I looked up sharply. Removed. According to the records, the property photographs were taken last week. I suddenly remembered the disconnected phone line, the paperless bank statements. Vanessa saying Jason had been overwhelmed lately. Every piece slid slowly into place like a puzzle I never wanted solved. They had not simply left me here. They had continued building a new life while quietly dismantling mine. My throat tightened painfully, but no tears came. At my age, heartbreak no longer arrives loudly. It settles quietly into your bones. Richard leaned forward gently. There are still things we can fix if you want to. I looked back down at the paperwork spread across the table. The signatures. The dates. My own handwriting sitting there beside legal language I barely remembered reading. Trust looks so harmless when it is written in ink. After a long silence, I asked the only question that truly mattered anymore. Did my son ever plan to bring me home? Richard did not answer right away. And somehow that silence told me everything. After Richard left that afternoon, I sat alone in the visitor lounge long after the winter sunlight disappeared from the windows. The paperwork remained spread across the table in front of me like pieces of someone else's life. My house. My accounts. My signatures. Everything looked official and clean on paper. That was the frightening part. Betrayal rarely looks ugly when lawyers organize it neatly into folders. That evening, I skipped dinner for the first time since arriving at the nursing home. Carol eventually found me sitting beside the darkened window in the second-floor hallway. You are going to catch a chill up here, she said softly as she draped a blanket across my shoulders. I smiled faintly. I think I already have. She sat beside me without asking questions right away. Good nurses understand silence better than most people. Finally, I told her everything. The house. The paperwork. The power of attorney. The sale. I expected shock or pity, but Carol only nodded slowly as if she had heard versions of this story before. Families become strangers faster than anyone wants to believe, she said quietly. Her words stayed with me through the rest of the week. Families become strangers. Every morning after that, I started noticing things I had ignored before. The residents who waited by the windows every afternoon. The unopened greeting cards taped beside untouched flower arrangements. The way certain names were never called during visitor hours anymore. Loneliness has a pattern when you live close enough to recognize it. 3 days later, something unexpected happened. I had just returned from physical therapy when the receptionist called my name from downstairs. Eleanor, you have a young visitor here. Young. My heart tightened immediately. As I stepped into the lobby, I saw Sophie standing awkwardly beside the front desk clutching her backpack straps. She looked taller than the last time I saw her. 16 now. Blonde hair tucked behind one ear exactly the way Jason used to do when he was nervous. The moment she saw me, her face lit up with relief. Grandma! I wrapped my arms around her before I could stop myself. She smelled like winter air and peppermint shampoo. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Dad said you were doing great here, she said once we sat together in the lounge. He said you loved all the activities. I looked at her carefully then. There was no manipulation in her voice. No performance. Just genuine belief. My chest ached in a completely different way now. Did he? I asked softly. Sophie nodded. He said you wanted quiet time for a while. Quiet time. I almost laughed at the cruelty hidden inside such gentle words. Sophie looked around the room uncertainly. I kept asking if we could visit more, but Mom always said you were tired or busy. For a moment I could not answer. I simply stared at my granddaughter sitting there in ripped jeans and a blue winter sweater, completely unaware she had just shattered the last excuse I still protected inside my mind. Jason had not forgotten me. He had hidden me. Sophie reached into her backpack suddenly. I almost forgot, she said, pulling out her phone. I took this yesterday. She turned the screen toward me. My breath caught instantly. It was my house. Except it no longer looked like my house at all. The family photographs were gone from the walls. The living room looked brighter. Empty. Staged furniture sat where Robert's old recliner used to be. Even the curtains had been replaced. Dad said some people came to decorate for the sale, Sophie explained carefully. Sale. Hearing the word out loud from my granddaughter somehow hurt more than Richard's paperwork ever could. I stared at the photograph while a strange calm settled over me for the first time in months. Not numbness. Not grief. Something colder. Clearer. Because sitting there beside Sophie, looking at strangers preparing to sell the home where I built my entire life, I finally understood something important. My son had not made one terrible decision. He had made hundreds of small ones. Quiet ones. Careful ones. And every single one had led me here. After Sophie left that evening, I sat alone in my room staring at the photograph on her phone that she had texted to me before going home. My living room looked like something from a furniture catalog now. Neutral pillows. Decorative bowls. Blank walls where family pictures used to hang. Even the quilt Robert's mother made before she passed away was gone from the couch. It was strange how quickly a home could stop looking like the people who built it. Snow continued falling outside the nursing home windows while residents drifted quietly through the hallways toward dinner. Somewhere nearby, someone was playing old Frank Sinatra songs from a portable radio. I used to love those songs. That night they sounded lonely. Around 8 o'clock there was a soft knock on my door. Carol stepped inside carrying 2 cups of tea. Thought you might need this, she said gently. I accepted the cup with both hands. Thank you. She studied my face carefully. You look different tonight. I stared down into the steam rising from the tea. I think I finally stopped waiting. Carol pulled the chair closer to my bed and sat down quietly. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then I surprised myself by saying something aloud I had only whispered inside my own thoughts before. I do not think my son ever planned for me to leave this place. The words sounded calm. Too calm. Like they belonged to somebody wiser and sadder than the woman I had been a few months earlier. Carol nodded slowly. Then maybe it is time you start planning for yourself instead of waiting for him to. That sentence settled deeply inside me. Because for months every thought I had revolved around Jason. Why he stopped calling. When he might visit. Whether he felt guilty. Whether Vanessa pushed him into all this. I had built my days around trying to understand people who clearly stopped trying to understand me. But sometime after midnight, sitting beside the window with snow covering the parking lot outside, something shifted quietly inside me. I realized I still had choices left. The next morning I called Richard Hale before I could lose my nerve. I want to review everything, I told him. The accounts. The house. All of it. Richard did not sound surprised. I was hoping you would say that, he answered gently. Over the next several days, Richard visited almost every afternoon carrying folders thick with paperwork. We sat together in the small library near the activity room while residents played cards nearby and nurses walked past balancing medication trays. Piece by piece, Richard explained what Jason had access to and what could still be protected. The power of attorney could be revoked. Certain transfers could be frozen temporarily. The will could be updated immediately. Every sentence felt strange coming out of Richard's mouth because I never imagined I would need protection from my own child. One afternoon, Richard slid a document across the table and tapped the signature line softly. "You are not taking revenge, Eleanor," he said quietly. "You are protecting yourself." I stared at the paper for a long moment before signing my name slowly and carefully. Eleanor Whitmore. My handwriting looked older now. Smaller somehow, but steadier than it had been in months. Later that evening, I sat in the common lounge while Christmas decorations were being hung around the nursing home. Red ribbons lined the staircase railings. Artificial pine garlands framed the windows. Several residents hummed carols while volunteers decorated cookies near the dining hall. Last year, I hosted Christmas Eve dinner in my own home. This year, strangers hung plastic ornaments while my son prepared to sell the house where every Christmas memory I owned still lived. My phone buzzed suddenly beside me. A voicemail notification from Jason. My heart did not race this time. I simply pressed play calmly. "Hey Mom," his voice said casually. "Sorry things have been hectic lately. I will try to stop by soon." Soon. Such a careless word. I listened to the message twice before quietly deleting it. Then I looked down at the signed paperwork resting in my lap and realized something for the first time in a very long while. My son still believed I was weak enough to wait for him forever. 3 days before Christmas, the nursing home held its annual holiday dinner in the community hall downstairs. Volunteers wrapped gold ribbon around the railings while paper snowflakes hung from the ceiling tiles. Someone placed battery-operated candles on every table to make the room feel warmer than it really was. Residents wore their nicest sweaters and pearl necklaces while old Christmas music drifted softly through hidden speakers. I almost stayed in my room that evening. But Carol insisted gently. "You cannot spend Christmas hiding from people who hurt you," she said while helping adjust the collar of my cardigan. "That only gives them more power." So I went downstairs carrying more dignity than joy. The dining hall smelled like roasted turkey, cinnamon, and coffee. Families filled nearly every table. Children ran between chairs while exhausted parents apologized politely to nurses. Across the room, Walter's daughter helped him straighten his tie before taking pictures beside the Christmas tree. I smiled for him even though something inside me still ached watching other people receive the love I kept waiting for. I sat alone near the window with a small plate of food I barely touched. Outside, snow drifted quietly beneath the parking lot lights. For the first time since arriving here, I no longer watched the entrance doors every few minutes. That part of me had finally grown tired. Halfway through dinner, my phone buzzed against the table. A voicemail notification from Richard. "Call me when you can," his message said. Calmly. "The bank notified us this afternoon that Jason attempted to transfer funds from one of your accounts. The transaction was blocked." I closed my eyes briefly after hearing the message. Not from shock anymore. Just exhaustion. Even now, after months of silence, Jason was still reaching into my life with hands that only remembered taking. Before I could gather my thoughts, the front doors of the dining hall opened behind me. Several residents looked up immediately. I turned slowly in my chair. Jason stood near the entrance beside Vanessa wearing a dark wool coat dusted lightly with snow. For one strange moment, the entire room seemed to freeze around me. My son smiled the moment our eyes met. Not warmly, nervously. Like a man rehearsing normal behavior, he no longer felt naturally. "Mom," he said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. There you are. Vanessa stepped forward carrying a gift bag with silver tissue paper peeking from the top. We wanted to surprise you for Christmas. Surprise. Another harmless word that suddenly sounded dishonest. Several residents nearby smiled approvingly at the scene. To them it probably looked touching. A busy son finally visiting his elderly mother during the holidays. Nobody in that room knew how many Sundays had passed in silence. Jason leaned down and kissed my cheek quickly. His cologne smelled exactly the same as it did when he hugged me goodbye at the nursing home months earlier. Sorry things have been crazy lately, he said softly while taking the seat beside me. Work has been overwhelming. I studied his face carefully under the soft dining hall lights. He looked older somehow. More tired. But not guilty enough. Vanessa slid the gift bag toward me across the table. Open it, she said brightly. Inside was a soft blanket embroidered with the nursing home's name. I stared at it for several seconds without speaking. It was not cruel. That was the unsettling part. It was practical. Thoughtful even. The kind of gift you buy for someone you believe will never leave. Jason cleared his throat awkwardly. Mom, I actually wanted to talk to you about a few financial things after dinner. There it was. Not an apology. Not Sophie asking about me. Not memories. Paperwork. Accounts. Logistics. Even now. Slowly, I folded the tissue paper back into the bag and looked directly at my son. Richard Hale visited me recently, I said quietly. Jason's expression changed instantly. Just for half a second. But I saw it. Fear. Real fear. Vanessa stopped smiling completely. Across the room, Christmas music continued playing while families laughed beside glowing decorations. But at our table, something colder settled into the silence between us. Because for the first time since Jason left me here, he realized I was no longer the confused old woman he believed would wait quietly while he dismantled her life. Jason stared at me across the Christmas dinner table while the color slowly drained from his face. Vanessa looked down immediately, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her coat sleeve the way nervous people do when they are trying to appear calm. Around us, the nursing home buzzed softly with holiday noise. Glasses clinked. Children laughed near the dessert table. Bing Crosby sang through ceiling speakers about snow and silver bells, while my family quietly unraveled in front of me. Jason forced a small laugh. Richard? Why would he visit you? I folded my hands neatly in my lap before answering. Because unlike my son, he still returns phone calls. The silence after that sentence felt strangely peaceful to me. Not angry. Not dramatic. Just honest. Jason glanced toward Vanessa before lowering his voice. Mom, I think maybe there has been some misunderstanding. Misunderstanding. Another careful word. I had noticed by then that people who betray you rarely use direct language. They hide inside softer phrases. Miscommunication. Confusion. Oversight. Anything except the truth. I looked at my son for a long moment beneath the glow of Christmas decorations. You sold my home without telling me, I said quietly. You changed my accounts. You disconnected my phone line. And you left me here believing you would come back every Sunday. Vanessa inhaled sharply beside him. Jason rubbed both hands together nervously. We were trying to handle things responsibly, he said. You were not safe living alone anymore. That may be true, I answered calmly. But safe and abandoned are not the same thing. For a moment, Jason looked almost offended by the word abandoned, as though the pain he caused sounded harsher spoken aloud than it did living quietly inside my life for months. He leaned closer. Mom, we never abandoned you. I almost smiled then. Because sometimes the saddest part of growing older is realizing people think kindness can be replaced with technicalities. Maybe Jason paid the nursing home bills on time. Maybe he convinced himself that counted as love. But love is not paperwork. Love is presence. It is phone calls. It is showing up before someone stops hoping you will. Richard arrived 20 minutes later carrying his leather briefcase dusted lightly with snow. The moment Jason saw him approaching the table, his shoulders stiffened. Richard greeted everyone politely before sitting beside me. Good evening, he said calmly. Then he placed several folders on the table between us. The same table where artificial candles flickered beside untouched pumpkin pie. As of this afternoon, Richard continued evenly, all account access previously granted through power of attorney has been formally revoked. Vanessa's expression hardened instantly. Jason stared at the paperwork without touching it. Mom, he whispered quietly, you cannot seriously be doing this. I turned toward him slowly. No, Jason, I said. You did this. His eyes finally met mine fully then. For the first time in months, there were no excuses left standing between us. Just consequences. Real ones. The room suddenly felt very quiet despite the Christmas music still drifting through the dining hall. Sophie appeared near the doorway then, carrying 2 paper cups of hot chocolate. She stopped the moment she sensed tension at the table. I smiled gently at her. Come sit with me, sweetheart. She walked over slowly and took the chair beside mine without asking questions. Jason watched us silently while Richard organized the documents back into his briefcase. The house sale is temporarily frozen pending further review, Richard added calmly. And Eleanor has decided to revise her estate. Arrangements moving forward. Vanessa looked stunned. Jason looked tired. But strangely, I felt lighter than I had in months. Not victorious. Just awake. Because sitting there beside my granddaughter under soft Christmas lights, I finally understood something that should have been obvious long ago. My worth as a mother was never supposed to depend on how much neglect I could quietly survive. Later that night, after everyone left, I stood alone beside the nursing home window watching snow cover the empty parking lot. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang softly through the cold December air. Behind me, residents slowly returned to their rooms while nurses dimmed the hallway lights for the evening. I pressed one hand gently against the cool glass and thought about the woman who first arrived here months ago carrying 2 small suitcases and a heart full of excuses for her son. That woman would have waited forever beside the window. But she was gone now. And that's the end of today's story. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more unforgettable stories like this. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.